Mr. Patch was the first grown-up to come to the Brown Detective Agency. He was carrying a watermelon. Mr. Patch owned a grocery store. He showed the watermelon to Encyclopedia Brown. It had a knife buried in it up to the handle. "Find the boy who owns this knife," roared Mr. Patch. "Look at what he did." Encyclopedia looked at the watermelon. "Stabbing a watermelon isn't against the law," he pointed out. "I mean, it's not the same as stabbing a person." "The knife ended in my watermelon. It started in the window of my storeroom. Someone used the knife to break into your storeroom and to open my money box," cried Mr. Patch. "How much was stolen?" asked Encyclopedia. "The thief didn't have time to take anything," said Mr. Patch in a calmer voice. "He heard me coming. He got scared. When he started to run, he tripped and he fell. His knife plunged into this watermelon. He didn't have time to pull it out." "Did you see his face?" Mr. Patch shook his head. "No, but I did see that he had the letter L on the back of his jacket. That means he's a lion, a member of the boys' club on Woodburn Avenue," said Encyclopedia. "That's a real lead." The private detective stepped closer to the watermelon. The knife had plunged into it so deeply that only the carved wood handle showed above the green skin. Only the carved wood handle showed above the green. Above the green skin. Mr. Patch laid a quarter on the gasoline can. "Find the owner of this knife. Quick!" "I'm sorry," replied Encyclopedia, thinking he would have to charge for expenses in this case. "I'll need a little time. I have to buy a fingerprint kit. Then I have to dust the hand of the knife, and there are no fingerprints," said Mr. Patch heavily. "I wiped them off." You wiped them off?" said Encyclopedia weakly. Mr. Patch explained. "My cat knocked a bag of flour off a shelf. It broke and spilled over the watermelon and knife. I wiped off the flour and the fingerprints too." Encyclopedia collapsed his head and moaned. And then he looked up. "Still, the thief doesn't know that you wiped off his fingerprints." Encyclopedia took out his handkerchief. He wrapped it carefully around the handle of the knife. "That does it," he said. "That makes it look as though we have fingerprints we are trying to save. The thief may try to wipe them off and give himself away. We'll have to watch all the lions. Let's go." Encyclopedia got into Mr. Patch's truck. They drove over to Woodburn Avenue. 4 lions, John, Frank, Corky, and Buster. Goddamn Buster. We're outside the club working on the engine of an old black car, although few in number. The lions are all big boys, bigger than Bugs Meany, but Mr. Patch is bigger than any of them. He had strong hands and big arms, so the lions listened when Encyclopedia spoke. "Do you see this watermelon?" he asked. "Now I take off the handkerchief. There. What do you see? The handle," said Buster, "of a knife," said Corky. "Very interesting," said John. "So what?" said Frank. "The knife," said Encyclopedia, "was used in an attempt to rob Mr. Patch's store." "The knife," said Buster, "doesn't belong," said Corky. "To any," said John. "Of us," said Frank. "Maybe not, but the police will probably take your fingerprints," said Encyclopedia. "If the guilty boy steps forward now, Mr. Patch will ask the police not to be too hard on him." The lions looked serious. Mr. Patch looked serious. The only boy detective in the state looked serious, but that was all. "It's not working the way you planned," said Mr. Patch in a whisper. "None of them has tried to wipe the handle of the knife." Encyclopedia Brown nodded. "Leave the knife in the watermelon just as it is. Don't touch it," he whispered back to the lions. He said, "The police will break up your club if they find one of you is a thief." The lions stopped looking serious. They looked scared. Suddenly, John said softly, "Frank owns a knife like that. A lot of fellows own knives with carved handles," retorted Frank. "Cut it out with the carved handle. You can see the handle." "You showed me yours yesterday," John shot back. "You even tried to get me to hold it. Why, my fingerprints might be on that handle." "It's not the same knife," said Frank, "so quit worrying." "I lost my knife last month," Buster said. "Everyone knows I did. Where's your knife, Corky?" "I lost mine too, Corky. This one couldn't be my knife anyways. Mine has a blade a half-inch longer." Well, Corky just gave it away right there. None of the lions remembered what the other knives really looked like. They began to argue loudly. Each boy tried to put himself in the clear. Too bad, muttered Mr. Patch. They're scared and fighting amongst themselves, but none of them has touched a knife to try to get rid of the fingerprint. Your plan didn't work. Oh, yes, it did, said Encyclopedia Brown. I know whose knife it is. How did Encyclopedia know whose knife it was? Turn to page 109 for the solution to the case of the knife and the watermelon. It's clear, Corky. I mean, it almost 1, 2, 3, 4. The last guy, I wanted it to be like the first guy, the second guy, or maybe it was like in between them words when all of a sudden it couldn't have been any of us. But it's Corky. It's motherfucking Corky. Goddamn, the lions they were okay. They were okay until Corky. You had Buster, Corky, John, and Frank. Goddamn Corky. He said he lost his knife, right? Everybody's sitting there saying John and Frank are blaming each other. And then Buster says that he lost his knife and goes, where's yours, Corky? And Corky says, well, I lost mine too. And then he says, this one couldn't be my knife anyways because mine has a blade a half-inch longer. You got a blade a half-inch longer. How can you have a blade a half-inch? How did you know how long the damn blade was? The knife is still stuck in the watermelon. And it was all the way up to the green, so just the wood handle. You couldn't see any of the blade. So you had no idea the watermelon, I mean, even if it was a small watermelon, you still have no idea how long that blade is. 1, 2, 3 inches, 4, 5, 6 inches. So how in the fuck did Corky? He lost his knife, but it doesn't matter anyways. He lost his knife, but his was, his blade was a half-inch longer. Half-inch, so it was what, 5.5 inches? Yeah, about 5.5 inches. How did you know what the blade looked like? It's because you had the knife beforehand. That's how you knew the knife. So Corky fucked up. Corky fucked up. Corky didn't realize it, but Corky snitched on himself. As Mr. Pat said, none of the lions touched the knife. So the blade was buried in the watermelon all the time the lions were looking at it. In other words, none of the lions could see how long the blade of the knife was. But Corky said his knife had a blade that was a half-inch longer than the one in the watermelon. That was his mistake. He could not have known how long the blade was unless he had seen it before. The knife belonged to Corky. The knife belonged to Corky. The case of the missing roller skates. Between 9 and 9:30 on Tuesday morning, Sally Kimball's roller skates disappeared from the waiting room in Dr. Vivian Wilson's office. I remember this. Somebody takes the skates, and then he says how many people had appointments, and then he goes and talks to the 2 people that had appointments in the medical building, which had lots of different doctors, but he went to every single room in the medical building and asked him if they had, the skates were his size. And so he had deduced that only a person would steal skates his size that had feet his size. So therefore, he asked anybody if a young person had came in all the medical buildings and found out two people, Billy Haggerty. Billy Haggerty had gone in. Billy Haggerty and somebody else. We'll take it from Billy Haggerty, okay? So let's check out Encyclopedia Brown. Shake down Billy Haggerty. He's going to become suspect number 1. Encyclopedia Brown got Bill Haggerty's address from the nurse in room 301. He hurried back to Dr. Wilson's office to use the telephone. He called Sally. He told her to meet him in front of Haggerty's house in half an hour. We got some rough going ahead of us, he warned. But Billy Haggerty turned out to be only an inch taller than Encyclopedia and shorter than Sally. Billy drew himself up to his full height at Encyclopedia's first question. Were you in Dr. Vivian Wilson's office this morning? Nah, snapped Billy. I don't know any Dr. Wilson. You didn't ask anyone about Dr. Wilson? Put in Sally. I'd never heard of him before you spoke his name, said Billy. Then you went straight to your own doctor on the 3rd floor, said Encyclopedia. Yeah, Dr. Stanton in room 301. What's it to you? Dr. Wilson's office is down the hall from both the stairs and the elevator. Encyclopedia Brown thoughtfully. You wouldn't pass his office going up or coming down. I don't know where his office is, and I don't care. It's none of your business where I was. We just don't, we just want to be sure you weren't in Dr. Vivian Wilson's office this morning, that's all, said Sally. Well, I wasn't. I had a sprained wrist, not a toothache. So why should I go near his office? Demanded Billy. I don't like snoopers. What are you after? A pair of roller skates, said Encyclopedia. Do you mind returning them? You've given yourself away. Bing, bam, boom. He did it twice. He did it twice. You never heard of Dr. Wilson before you spoke his name? Okay, maybe the Dr. Wilson. Okay, you assumed it was a man, but then he says it's Vivian. Vivian Wilson. Well, why would you still assume that Vivian Wilson is a man? Vivian is a woman's name. But instead, after hearing Dr. Vivian Wilson's name, he still says, I didn't go into his office, indicating he knew who Dr. Vivian Wilson was. He knew who Dr. Vivian Wilson was because he knew Vivian was a man and not a woman. Bill Haggerty said that he had never heard of Dr. Vivian Wilson and that he didn't know where his office was, but he knew too much about him. He knew that Dr. Vivian Wilson was, 1, a man, not a woman, and 2, a dentist and not a doctor. Oh, I didn't see that part. A dentist and not a doctor. What happened there? A dentist. Apparently, I didn't go to his office, and besides, I had a toothache. Is that what he said? Yeah. I had a sprained wrist, not a toothache. Doctor doesn't say dentist or doctor. You would assume like a heart doctor or something, right? Not, you would say dentist if you went to the dentist. Typically. So there you go. Nah, I don't know, no. Mr. Vivian. Oh, Vivian the man dentist? No, I don't know no Vivian man dentist Hayes.